Committee on Oversight and Government Reform will come to order. Without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. We have an important hearing today. We appreciate the many people that are here to participate in that. We also appreciate the patience with votes on the floor that get called a little bit later. That always serves as the primary thing that we do in the afternoon around here. So we appreciate your patience. But nevertheless, we do have a very important hearing highlighting the General Accountability Office's high-risk report, 25 years of problematic practices. This year marks the 25th anniversary of the GAO's high-risk list. I have a full statement, but in the essence of time, I'm going to insert those comments into the record and would invite other members to do the same. But I'd now like to recognize the Ranking Member, Mr. Cummings, if he has any opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to do the same. I want to thank all of our witnesses, and I'll submit my statement for the record. And I want to always, as usual, thank you, Mr. Dodaro, and all of the GAO employees who do a great job and help us so much. With that, I yield back.
Thank you. I'll hold the record open for 5 legislative days for any member who would like to submit a written statement. And we now like to recognize our first witness. I'm pleased to welcome the Honorable Gene Dodaro, Comptroller of the United States Government Accountability Office. He is accompanied by a panel of experts from the GAO, and on behalf of both of us in this whole body, we thank the thousands of men and women who serve in the GAO who really work hard to create a work product and present it here today. So we welcomed all. Pursuant to committee rules, the witness will be sworn in before he testifies. We will also swear in the panel behind him should their input be needed during their questioning. So if you could all rise, please. Thank you. If you rise and please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Let the record reflect that all the witnesses answered in the affirmative. Mr. Dodaro, you have testified before our committee several times. We'll give you great latitude here, but we would appreciate your summarizing your comments, and then your entire written statement will obviously be made part of the record. Now recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon to you, Ranking Member Cummings, all the members of the committee. I'm very pleased to be here today to discuss GAO's latest high-risk update. We do this with the beginning of each new Congress to identify areas we believe are at highest risk of fraud, waste, abuse, and mismanagement in the Federal Government or in need of broad-based transformation. Our report today discusses solid, steady progress in most of the 30 high-risk areas that we've had on the list since our last update in 2013. All the areas we've rated according to 5 criteria to get off the high-risk list. You have to have leadership commitment, top-level attention. You have to have the capacity, the resources, and the people with the right skills to be able to fix the problem. You have to have a good corrective action plan that addresses root cause, a good monitoring effort with interim milestones and metrics to gauge progress, and you have to demonstrate that you're actually fixing the problem. You don't have to be 100% fixed, but we have to be convinced that we're on the right path to rectifying the problem and reducing the risk and eliminating waste and improving government services. Of the 30 areas, 18 have at least partially met all 5 criteria, and 11 of those 18 have at least fully met one or more of the criteria and partially met the others. In 2 areas, we're recognizing progress so that we're narrowing the scope of the high-risk area. First is on FDA's oversight of medical devices. We are pleased with their efforts to get the recall process under better control and discipline, and also to have a good process to review the applications for new devices in a more risk-based approach. We're still concerned about their need to oversee the global marketplace for medical products and drugs. 80% of the ingredients of active drugs come from other countries, about 40% of finished drugs, about half of medical devices. So they need to do more there, and also to address drug shortage issues. Second area is contract management. we believe the Department of Defense has focused more attention at top leadership on contracting tools and techniques and reducing the risk associated with undefinitized contracts where they start contract work without having a clear agreement with the contractor, or they're using time and materials, which is a risky contract approach, rather than having deliverables. They still have to improve their areas in their acquisition workforce, service acquisitions, and improve their use of contracting in operational environments to support military operations in theater. We are adding 2 new areas to the high-risk list this year. First is VA's provision of health care service for veterans. We're very concerned about this area. There are 5 fundamental problems that we've identified: ambiguous policies, inconsistent processes, inadequate oversight and monitoring of the activities, IT challenges, inadequate training of staff, and unclear resource needs and allocations. Congress has passed legislation recently to give them additional $15 billion to help address this problem. That legislation has to be implemented properly. We have over 100 recommendations that we've made to VA that have yet to be fully implemented. So this is an area that needs congressional oversight and continued attention. Second are IT acquisitions and operations across the Federal Government. Too often, the Federal Government, and we enumerate this in our report, there's a litany of efforts that have failed after spending hundreds of millions of dollars, or in cases billions of dollars in many years. They're terminated. There's a longer list of problems where there are cost overruns, schedule slippages, or they fail to deliver the promised functionality and make improvements in the programs that they're supposed to in delivery of services. Here again, the Congress has passed legislation late last year. This committee was instrumental in passing the legislation of Federal Information Technology Reform Act to give CIOs additional authority, put in place better practices to have more disciplined approaches to IT management. Here again, just in the last 5 years alone, we've made 737 recommendations. Only 23% have been fully implemented. So we believe this is a critical area. We're also expanding 2 areas. In the administration, the tax area, we've been focused on the tax gap, which at last count was $385 billion. We're expanding that to include identity theft. And the IRS was able last year to stop about $24 billion in fraudulent returns potentially, but they missed, by their own estimates, about $5.8 billion. We've got some fixes to this we can talk about in the Q&A. We're also expanding cybersecurity and critical infrastructure protection to include privacy issues. Initially, we designated computer security across the entire Federal Government, first time we ever did that, in 1997. We added critical infrastructure protection because most of the computer assets are in the private sector hands in 2003. Now, there's a lot more incidents involving personally identifiable information. The number of incidents have doubled over the last 5 years. Privacy law was passed in 1994. It's sorely in need of updating, and we have a number of other recommendations to protect this sensitive information. American people deserve for their information to be protected properly while we're addressing the cybersecurity issues. I thank you for the opportunity to be here today and look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you. I appreciate it. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Heiss, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Just one quick question for you, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. Since the enactment of the Veterans Access, Choice, and Accountability Act, I have a number of veterans in my district who, because of their location where they live, they've not been able to utilize VA medical centers, and so they have opted to use non-VA doctors and so forth. And one of the issues they are facing are significant delays from the VA paying those medical providers. Is there anything that the GAO plans to do in the future to evaluate this issue and to report on it in the future?
Actually, we've already addressed that issue and issued a report talking about the problems they were having in paying providers in a timely manner. We're also concerned about the fact that the VA doesn't always have information enough to make sure that they're making the right decisions in terms of whether they should be providing the care or going to a non-health care provider, both for access purposes and for making sure that it's a cost-effective approach. Debbie Draper is our expert in this area. I'll have her talk about the recommendations we've made, but we've already addressed this issue. We plan to follow up, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, we actually conducted work about a year or so ago, and we made a number of recommendations around the infrastructure surrounding the non-VA care. And a lot of the issue were not paying claims promptly. And so we do have concerns about non-VA care, and we have concerns that it may not be the panacea that people envision it could be. Because there is not really the infrastructure in place, or it wasn't in place, when we took a look at the work. So, you're talking about putting people, the VA system is a very difficult system to navigate, so now you're also asking them to navigate another system that's outside of the VA. So there's just a lot of issues around non-VA care. And the other issue is that wait times for non-VA care is not really tracked, so no one really knows how long people are waiting to get care in the community. So there's just a lot of issues, and it is something we'll be looking at, and the Choice Act does have several mandates for GAO to look at the non-VA care.
Well, thank you. Obviously, the concern is if these payments are slow in being received, at some point, I'm fearful that our veterans will receive diminished health care across the board, and that is the concern. I thank you. I yield my time.
Yeah, I'm concerned too, Congressman. We'll stay on top of it.
Thank you, sir.
Gentleman yields back. We now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Cummings from Maryland.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dodaro, one of my major concerns have been drug shortage. Whether the members of Congress know it, but 99% of all hospitals in this country have drug shortages. And there are people, Mr. Dodaro, as you know, who are, unbeknownst to them, getting second, third-rate drugs. And even in my own district, with one of the #1 hospitals in the world, Johns Hopkins, they have told us that they have those problems. Can you comment briefly on that, where we are on that, and what can we do about that?
Yeah, it's a very important issue, Congressman. One of the things that we've already suggested to the Congress and they've acted on, before drug manufacturers didn't have to notify FDA if they were going to have potential shortages. And now they have to provide adequate notice ahead of time. So that was one step in the right direction. Marcia Cross, our expert in that area, will talk about other work we've done and recommendations we've made to address this issue. It's one of the reasons FDA is on the high-risk list.
Yes, Congressman, we agree that it's a big concern, and drug shortages is one of the areas that's keeping FDA on the high-risk list. As the Comptroller General mentioned, Congress did take action to require advance notification to FDA if a manufacturer was going to cease producing a drug. Congress, just over a year ago, also enacted the Drug Quality and Security Act that we believe can help, particularly with this issue of substandard drugs, because it's enacted requirements for tracking of drugs through the system that can help reduce the possibility of the gray market drugs that I know you had been concerned about, and also counterfeit drugs getting into the system, because there will be a system of tracking. It's still not implemented. It will take a number of years for that to go into effect. But that act, we think, also has potential to address that. We are continuing to track drug shortages, and we have ongoing work looking at it. We know the number of shortages is coming down, but there are still some that are persisting for long periods of time, for multiple years for certain drugs.
I am glad that our committee a few minutes ago agreed as part of our plan to look at generic drugs. Again, every single member of Congress has this problem, and many of them don't even know it, that generic drugs are going up sometimes as much as 800 times in a matter of a day, which is ridiculous. And it's about greed. A lot of it is about greed. But let me go into another issue. The whole issue of cyber. I just want to read from your report, Mr. Dodaro, and you all say this, quote, "The increasing sophistication of hackers and others with malicious intent and the extent to which both Federal agencies and private companies collect sensitive information about individuals have increased the risk of personally identifiable information being exposed and compromised. That's an accurate statement, is that right?
Yes.
Your report goes on to say, and I quote, the number of reported security incidents involving PII at Federal agencies has increased significantly in recent years, and a number of high-profile breaches of PII have occurred at commercial entities. For these reasons, we added protecting the privacy of PII to the high-risk area, end of quote. So your report highlights attacks against both public and private sector entities. And one thing these attacks seem to have in common is the hackers want access to personal information of as many Americans as possible. That's a major problem. Is that right?
That's exactly right, and that's why we're adding it to the list. And Congressman, there's projections by informed parties that the amount of information that's collected, stored, and disseminated is going to double and triple every 2 or 3 years. So this problem is on a trajectory to get a lot worse before it gets under control.
So the sources of these hackers could be anywhere in the world, is that right?
Yes.
And they could be state-sponsored, they could be international criminals, they could be domestic hackers, or any of the above, is that right?
Yes.
And so I see you have your fellow...
And my cyber expert right handy here.
And what can we do about that? You can identify yourself, please, sir.
Sure. My name is Greg Wilshusen, and I think there's a number of actions that both the Congress can do as well as Federal agencies who collect this type of information. First, with the Federal agencies, agencies need to implement effective information security programs that adequately protect the confidentiality and integrity of their information, to include not only personally identifiable information, but other sensitive information. We have found over the years that agencies have not done a very good job of this. For example, in fiscal year 2014, 17 out of the 24 agencies that are covered by the Chief Financial Officers Act reported either a material weakness or significant deficiency in their information security controls for financial reporting purposes. IGs at 22 of the 24 agencies identified cybersecurity or information security as a major management challenge for their agency.
All right. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Hurd, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, sir, for being here today. I enjoyed reading your report for the outrageousness of some of the things that are listed in there. And one of the questions that I have, about 80% of the administration's IT spending goes to maintain legacy systems. Many of those systems, most Americans would think would be incredibly out of date. What's a more appropriate, investment to maintenance ratio?
What we've said, and I'll stay upon our expert in the IT area, what we've said is that this should be under operational reevaluation every year. There are ways to drive down technology costs. In a lot of areas, the costs are decreasing if you're making the proper investments and reinvestments. We find a lot of duplication where the systems are being duplicated because of a lack of oversight and a portfolio assessment. The Congress has underscored the need to be able to do this in the agencies. But unfortunately, the trends are going in the wrong direction, where there's additional spending in the O&M area, operations and maintenance area, rather than coming down as it should be in that area. And Dave could talk about more specific recommendations that we've made.
Yeah, Congressman Hurd, to highlight the trends, we are spending $80 billion spent right now. We're only spending about $15 billion on new development. The remaining is going towards operations and maintenance. That's why in our high-risk report, there's many areas where we have inefficiencies. Data center consolidation, there's about $7 to $10 billion on the table if we consolidate data centers appropriately. There's also
on that question, the report highlights as shy of 10,000 data centers. What should be, where should that number be?
Well, I think the plan is to close about 4,000 of those 10,000 roughly. That's the game plan for all the major Federal agencies right now. And the game plan is to save at least $7.5 billion through 2017. So that's right around the corner. In addition to data centers, we have a lot of duplication that this committee has focused on over the past couple of years. There's probably another $5 billion in savings looking at duplicative systems too. So you can easily get to over $10 billion in savings. Move that inefficient spending out of the O&M spend and into the development where we are modernizing the government more appropriately.
Thank you. And my question, along the same lines, CIOs play an important role in oversight and governance of these projects. Are Federal agencies, CIOs, effective, and what tools do they need to become more effective?
I think with the Federal CIO, it's a mixed bag. We see some CIOs that are quite successful and others that aren't. That's why I think the legislation that this committee was instrumental in passing, FATARA, which strengthened the CIO authorities, is going to be really instrumental going forward so that we can manage this $80 billion more appropriately.
Right. The CIOs need to be more involved, and they need to be held accountable for these efforts, and it needs to be more uniform across the government. And if this legislation is successfully implemented, we should achieve those goals.
On the area of accountability, Mr. Dodaro, how long have you been with GAO?
This June will be 42 years.
Have you seen anybody in the Federal government fired for cost or time overruns?
I'm trying to think. I'm sure there have been people who have been in big trouble as a result of it. I can tell you that. I know about that. I can't think of any specific personnel actions offhand, but there have been people who have been under a lot of scrutiny and have suddenly retired in that process. So yes, there have been people that have been moved out.
Good copy. Thank you. I yield back my time.
Would my colleague yield just for a second?
Yes.
I thank my colleague. You brought up two very important points on CIOs and on legacy systems and data center consolidation. The FATARA bill, also known as Isa Conley, our preferred name, does address all three things and mandates data center consolidation. Also requires, there are 250 people with the title CIO spread out over 24 Federal agencies. Imagine that. So our bill says there ought to be one primary CIO for every agency who's accountable and has authority. So that's what Mr. Dodaro is talking about hopefully with the implementation of that bill, we're going to see some real progress, and it's something I hope we will monitor. I know Mr. Meadows and I intend to do that in the subcommittee. Thank you.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. We now recognize the gentlewoman from the District of Columbia, Ms. Norton, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My colleague asked about cost overruns. If people get fired for cost overruns, half the Defense Department would be gone, because that's where you have most of the cost overruns in our country. I'm very interested in this high-risk list, because I've been obediently listening to this list for a long time, and I never knew much about how you get on it and how you get off it. So I'd like to drill down a little bit about it, particularly considering that GAO must look at what must be hundreds, thousands of agencies in order to draw its list. And I must say, whenever there's good news, it seems to me this committee ought to be the first to note it. But I did note that highlighted, I think almost on your first page, it says solid, steady progress has been made in the vast majority of high-risk areas. I don't believe I've seen that kind of language before in your reports. You say that more than one-third of the areas previously designated as high risk have been removed. So I'd like to know, how do you get on it and how do you get removed?
First of all, we have published criteria that we vetted with the executive branch years ago about how you get on and how you come off. How you get on is we look at the significance of the risk, both in quantitative terms. In other words, there has to be at least $1 billion in risk. There has to be issues. It's either a public safety issue, like oversight of medical products and food safety we have on the list. It has to be important to national security, economic security for the country. It has risk of program failures, programs actually not achieving their objectives because they're on the high-risk list. And so there's a long list of factors that we consider. And we also look as to whether or not the agencies have corrective action plans in place. If they do have a plan and it looks like it's going to be a good plan and they may be successful, we may hold off on putting them on the list and give them an opportunity to fix it. Now, you come off by 5 criteria. Top leadership commitment, There have to be a commitment by the top leaders in the agency, sustained. They have to have the capacity, the people, and the number of people and the right skills and the right numbers and resources to be able to fix the problem. They have to have a good plan, a corrective action plan that addresses the root causes of the problems. You have to have a monitoring effort with interim milestones and metrics, and you have to actually then demonstrate that you are fixing the problem. If you meet those 5 criteria, you come off the list. If you do that in part of the high-risk area, we narrow the high-risk area to those areas that you haven't. Like we mentioned this year, we did in 2 areas. So that's how you do that. Now,
well, the reason I noticed the second, I think the second criteria mentioned the word resources. Would it be fair to say that a significant challenge for getting off the list would be the scarcity of funding these days, since that's one of your criteria?
Yeah, well, by resources, we mean the skills necessary, the right people.
So it doesn't mean funding at all. Let me ask you, is funding a significant challenge for agents implementing your recommendations and getting off the list?
It could be, but it could be that they're not using the funding that they have very well. It's not necessarily mean they need more funding.
Accepted. Could I ask you what Congress can do, assuming that Congress is not going to do much about resources? I'll take an area of specific interest to me, real estate. That is the area, the Federal Government's handling of its real estate portfolio has been under constant criticism from the GAO. Could you tell me how, considering the billions of dollars involved in leasing and construction, how the real estate portfolio is doing?
Yes. First, I would say on the high-risk list, we have asterisk areas where the Congress needs to take action in order to help address the area. So there's a substantial number of the 32 areas that we've already designated for Congress. Postal Service reform is one. Cybersecurity is another. The need to finance the nation's transportation infrastructure systems, another one. So we've designated major areas where Congress needs to be part of the solution to the problem. In the real property area, what Congress can do, one of the areas that it's on the list is the over-reliance on leasing. And we've tried to convince the agencies, particularly GSA, to put forward a case to the Congress that says, look, it would be cheaper to own this particular property rather than lease these properties, but they've been reluctant to do so. So we think the Congress ought to mandate that they do that in that area. There are also underutilized properties that the Congress could give additional authority in pilot areas to try to provide these things. There's a lot of barriers that we've identified that Congress could help alleviate for the agencies to do this. But they need a good strategic plan. They have not yet presented to Congress with a good strategic plan on how to address this area. We've recommended it. They're working on the plan right now for the first time, and so we're hopeful to see it this year, and hopefully it will provide a good roadmap for them and for the Congress.
Thank you. Very useful.
Thank you. Thank the gentleman. Now I recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Micah, for 5 minutes.
Texas. Stay here.
Sorry. Meant to say Florida.
Texas.
Florida.
Mr. Where it's warm.
Don't mess with Texas.
Great state, but I'd rather be from Florida right now. Mr. Dodaro, have you ever seen the movie Groundhog Day?
Yes, over and over.
Yeah. Well, I'm sitting here, and I swear a lot of the recommendations are the same recommendations you brought us before. A segue from Ms. Norton's and your comments. In fact, I just read the Chairman, myself, Mr. Denham, we've been interested in excess property, and you can't get people to move on dealing with excess property. I think we found 14,000 in GSA, and we did the first hearing at the old post office, and I put an X through and I put 13,999. We've done about 6 more in vacant properties, some of them moving, but I'm only going to be here so long. Even this guy's young. We can't do a hearing on every property. What's concerns me, and you just said it, in your report, is OMB in conjunction with land-holding agencies could improve its capacity and action by implementing, this is dealing with excess or underutilized properties, to develop a strategic plan. They have not done that. OMB has not done that. One of the things, too, and I've discussed this, Mr. Chairman, briefly with Mr. Denham, in the bill that there were two bills offered. Mr. Chaffetz offered one. I worked with Mr. Denham. He authored another. But we need a requirement that they have a plan, and then there be some annual action on the plan and the recommendation, some triggering mechanism. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes.
And none of them will make a decision. The stuff just sits there. It sits there. It sits there. So I come back again, and we're having Groundhog Day on excess property. Finally, on the administration, this is on the administration released the results of a freeze on footprint policy, which they indicate to freeze, reduce the government's office and warehouse space. They gave you that report. You analyzed that report, and they claim they reduced the federal warehouse space by 10.2 million square feet. But then you said they didn't.
That's
Can you elaborate?
Yes, I'll ask Phil Herz, our leader on that report.
Hi, Mr. Michael. Yeah, one of the things we like to do is go behind some of those kind of estimates, take them apart, try to see where some of the flaws are. And that, in looking at the freeze the footprint data, we saw some things that were miscounted, also things that were vacant, but then they were counted separately in GSA's database. One of the things that really underscores, and it's something that we've testified before your subcommittees previously, is the real problem with the data on the property.
That's right. We found, in fact, one, they didn't know what property they had.
Correct.
They didn't know the condition of the property that they had.
Correct.
They didn't know the status of it for being eligible for either future utilization or current, or keep an inventory. I mean, right down the line, they did not know. In fact, they gave us lists that we checked, and you checked, right, that showed that that what they were giving us was totally incorrect. Is that not correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Well, this is something else we've got to get as some requirement for these agencies. And if OMB won't do it, we can do it statutorily. I know Mr. Chaffetz is committed to get a bill through the House and the Senate that will that'll get a handle on this. But we have to have triggers. We have to have milestones. We have to have some measure of them achieving a goal or performance. Am I wrong?
I agree. And any major management reform that's
Mr. Mike.
And any major management reform that's been successful over time has a statutory underpinning. Yeah. And that will transcend administrations and Congress.
Coming soon. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Now I recognize the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Conley, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Dodaro, for being here. This is maybe this says what a wonk I am, but I actually really look forward to this hearing every year. And I congratulate GAO for the intellectual underpinning of identifying these risk categories. I think it's an incredible, helpful public policy document, and I hope a useful management tool. It also guides us, and especially this committee. So much of what you're talking about is all about our agenda. So hopefully we will also take it to heart and respond accordingly. Mr. Dodaro, you actually endorsed our bill, FTARA, also known preferably as Isaac Connolly. How important is it to you that that get implemented?
That's very important. I mean, that's a critical, that's one of the reasons, actually, we put IT acquisitions and operations on the list, is in order to elevate attention to make sure that FTARA, Isaac Connolly bill, is implemented effectively.
I'm sorry, what was that last part?
But if it doesn't have attention, and I'm also concerned because, you know, we're coming to the last 2 years of this administration, it's got to be sustained in the next administration. Having the statutory underpinning is critically important, and it gives us and the Congress means to hold people accountable over time. So it's absolutely critical to rectifying this problem that we've identified.
And there are real potential savings if we can make this work. Is that not correct?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely, in the billions.
Yeah, in the billions,
Yes.
Mr. Chairman. So I know we're going to work on a bipartisan basis to actually have oversight hearings on implementation to goad and exhort and encourage, and I think that's really good. Mr. Dodaro, with respect to this whole subject, you're familiar with the 25-point implementation plan of Reform Federal Information Technology Management that was issued December 9th, 2010 by Vivek Kundra.
Yes. Yeah, I'm familiar with it, and I'm joined by Dave Ponner, who's our IT expert.
And I assume that you both, well, let me not assume. Was that a helpful document in terms of laying out goals and objectives?
Yes.
Yeah, it was extremely
concur.
helpful. It set the foundation
Sets
for
the
a lot of the
foundation.
key initiatives going forward.
And for example, when it talks about we ought to approve funding of major IT programs only when it meets 3 basic criteria, right? Have a dedicated program manager and a fully staffed integrated program team. Use a modular approach with usable functionality delivered every 6 months. I think they mean by that break up huge multi-year complex systems integration contracts so that they're easier to manage. And thirdly, use specialized IT acquisition professionals. Are those, do you think those are 3 helpful criteria when we're looking at issuing a major procurement?
Yeah, absolutely.
And did we follow that advice from the White House itself when the website for the healthcare rollout was occurring?
No, we did not.
We did not. So hopefully our bill, but also even the guidance that Vivek Kundra issued from the White House going 4 years ago plus, might have spared us some of the grief and embarrassment that in fact occurred.
Yeah, they have. We've issued 9 factors that are critical to successful efforts that have been put in place. There's Vivek's guidance, there's GAO guidance, there's best practice. The basic problem that I've seen over the years is there's a lack of discipline to follow good practices.
Yeah.
We get off the rails and nobody's held accountable during that period of time. Modular development, incremental development, CIOs was one of the basic tenets of the 1996 legislation that I helped Congress work on passing. It just hasn't been implemented. So I commend this committee for your recent legislation. I look forward to working with you to make sure it's successfully implemented, but it will require congressional oversight, and I look forward to that.
And I will point out, as the Chairman knows and the Ranking Member knows, when we put together this bill, it was a bipartisan bill, and we essentially, a lot of what we did was codify recommendations that came out of the White House itself. It was not a hostile bill. And so hopefully it will be seen that way as a useful management tool. And we look forward to working with you as we follow and monitor and, as I said, exhort the implementation, because there are enormous savings to be had and some very significant efficiencies. So
yes, and better services to the public.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Duncan, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I don't, I'll take just a moment. I just want to say, Mr. Dodaro, I think you do a very good job, and I appreciate the work that GAO does. You've been very helpful to me on this committee. I've been here 26 years. When I tell these newer members of this, they look at me like I'm from outer space. My main committee has always been the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, and I've heard Dr. Dillingham testify more probably than any other witness, and he seems like a good man.
He is.
But I just want to say that I think the GAO does a great job, and I appreciate what you all do. And that's all I wanted. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Duncan.
Gentleman yields back. We'll now recognize the gentlewoman.
Mr. Chairman,
from.
I know that there are other witnesses who want to know what Mr. Dodaro's magic is that he got that guy.
Yeah. We'll now recognize the gentlewoman from the Virgin Islands, Ms. Plaskett, for 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
I really wanted to thank you for all of the work that your agency does and to talk to you about one of the primary things that you all do is uncovering waste and fraud and abuse and identification of the risk of integrity of the Federal programs. We know, however, that there is also best practices that your agency tries to identify, not only for the public sector, but for the private as well. And we understand now that the cyber attacks are not just on the Federal agencies, but also on private. We know, we've heard about Home Depot and the compromise of about 56 million companies and the credit card and debit card information, as well as Anthem, the nation's second largest health insurance company with more than 80 million records that may have been compromised. I see that one of your colleagues are coming over to assist you.
He's our cyber expert, Greg Wilshusen.
Great.
We sense a cyber question.
You sense very well. One of the things I wanted to talk with you about is this notion of segregating duties. If you could briefly explain for us what that concept is and how that works.
Yes. Now, that's been one of the major problems that we've identified over the years. Greg can explain the importance of it.
It's vitally important to assure that systems and information are adequately protected from unauthorized modification, alteration. And it basically relates that the activities of one individual or group are countered by the activities, or overseen, if you will, by the activities of another group. So one group does not have full control of a transaction or of a process in which it can then perform unauthorized activities without detection. Within the cyber realm, that often relates to having, for example, software developers being able to operate in the production environment where real live actual data is being processed, because they could potentially make undetected changes to the software processing that data. And you don't want that to happen. So software developers in this case should be confined to a development environment.
Okay, so my understanding, and you know, I'm not, my children will tell you I have no, I'm a Luddite, I have no technological knowledge, but kind of like a submarine where when there's a leak in one area, you can close off that section, and then another area where the leak occurs doesn't infect the other areas with the segregation of duties. Is that occurring now in the Federal agencies with the IT?
Yes, in several agencies there are instances where they have weaknesses. I think it's about 14 agencies that have weaknesses in segregation of duty controls. And the example you highlighted actually also speaks to defense in depth. And that's another security defense principle, that agencies should put layer upon layer of security controls, so in the event that one layer may be circumvented or penetrated, that other controls help to protect the data and systems at hand.
So now one of the reasons that I mentioned Home Depot and Anthem, we know that this has occurred in other private sector areas, is what is the relationship that you all have with trying to assist those private sector individuals in best practices? Because at the end of the day, all of these systems connect with one another.
Yes, actually it's the Department of Homeland Security that has an overriding role within the Federal Government for helping and assisting with critical infrastructure industries and protecting their information and their systems. In addition, for certain retail companies like this, it may also be the Federal Trade Commission that would also provide assistance and guidance to those entities.
We've been encouraging and exhorting for years more dialogue and information sharing between the public sector and the private sector. Both have been reticent for different reasons to share information, but that's really the only way that this problem is eventually going to be solved. Congress has made some overtures in this area on legislation. We believe more legislation could be helpful in this regard.
Well, I'm hopeful that this body will continue to assist you in making sure that that happens. And I yield the balance of my time.
Thank the gentlewoman. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Lynch, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member. And Mr. Dodaro, good to see you again, and all your cohorts. I agree with Mr. Conley's remarks that this may not be the most sexy hearing of the year, but
objection.
Well, I think it may reflect best the core mission of this this committee. However, I do notice in your list of areas of concern, you've got a list of the 2015 high risk list that the VA Health is on that list for the first time. I know it's one of the 2 new areas, and this designation comes in light of the longstanding and systemic weaknesses, in accessibility and quality of care. We saw the problems that we had down at the Phoenix VA, terrible situation there, and we also have, quite frankly, a huge increase in the number of veterans that are now, for the first time in their lives, relying on the VA for their health care. We went from 6.8 million veterans in 2002 to 9.4 million enrollees in 2015. So it's put a huge amount of pressure on the system, including 1.4 veterans from Operation Iraqi Freedom and Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan. And mindful that most of those folks did multiple tours. I was in Kandahar province not long ago, and I asked how many folks were on their first tour, their second tour. I got all the way up to 7 tours of duty before I ran out of Marines. Most of them had been there 3 or 4 tours of duty. So that repeated cycle of deployments does a lot of damage, I think, to the psychiatry of serving among our young men and women, and I think that we're going to see reverberations in the healthcare system as a result of those multiple deployments. But I am looking forward. I'm actually the ranking Democrat on the National Security Subcommittee that is going to address those, and I look forward to your good work continuing in that area, especially with some of the new implementations that we've had, allowing veterans to be treated at non-VA facilities if we do have a backup in appointment time, and that's been a constant problem for us, not just in the Northeast, but all across America. I know Florida is all backed up because of the number of retirees down there. They've had a very long backlog there. Some of the areas in Texas as well. Virginia, my friend Mr. Connolly, a huge number of veterans in his district as well. And also we've got another provision that allows them to go to non-VA facilities where their travel to a VA facility is more than 40 miles. So it all builds up to a greater reliance on our ability to conduct oversight in the VA healthcare system. I look forward to working with you. You've got a great staff. You've got a good cohort of people behind you that have worked tirelessly over the years. I'm looking forward. We've got no shortage of issues to work on, and I just appreciate the work that you do every single day. Thank you. Now you'll.
I would ask my friend to yield.
Oh yeah, sure.
For a question, Mr. Lynch, how many times have you been to Afghanistan or Iraq?
I would say Iraq about 14 times, and I'd say Afghanistan about 12 times. Oftentimes with folks from that Mr. Dodaro works with, Special Inspector Generals of Iraq construction or Afghanistan reconstruction as well.
Well, I just want to say, for me, you have been a model of oversight and commitment to the work in both countries at personal risk and peril to yourself, and I honor you for that. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
I would just say, in terms of the picture that you paint, not only have we more veterans coming back with multiple tours, but they're going to be living longer thanks to modern medicine. But this problem will occur over decades, and we need to get a handle on it right now. There will be more veterans even coming back. So this is really a very significant long-term issue, and that's one of the reasons we put it on the high-risk list.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. Now recognize the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Maloney, for 5 minutes.
Late to the committee because I was at a meeting on cybersecurity, which is really one of the biggest challenges we face as a nation, and I believe it's an area that we will, in a bipartisan way, work together to address. So I want to mention the assessments that you have found for dealing with cyber attacks. And your report found that many agencies had, and I quote, inconsistently implemented policies and procedures for responding to a data breach involving P11. Can you explain for the committee those areas in which GAO found that agencies were inconsistent in their implementation of policies for responding to data breaches, and what do we do about it?
Yes. Greg Wilshusen will address that. He's our expert in the area.
Okay, great.
Yes, we conducted a review at several Federal agencies over their procedures and policies for responding to security incidents involving personally identifiable information. And one of the things we identified is that agencies did not consistently identify the risk to the affected individuals and the harm that could occur, the impact that it could occur to those individuals. In addition, they were inconsistent at what point do they provide additional services to those individuals. For example, whether or not to provide credit monitoring services or other types of services in order to help those that have been whose information has been compromised.
Okay. And to the point, what can Congress do to assist you, GAO, in advocating that Federal agencies are being consistent in carrying out policies that respond to these breaches?
We believe that the Privacy Act, which was originally passed in 1974, needs to be updated, and Congress should take that upon their responsibilities. The agencies are collecting more information than was contemplated in the Privacy Act, because the Privacy Act deals with records of information, but now through social media and other means, more information is being collected that wasn't contemplated when the Act was passed. The definitions in the Act are very broad, which leads to inconsistent applications and can be done. There's not enough notice that's made to the public. Typically, in those days, it was through the Federal Register, but there are more available tools now to notify the public and make things available. So the Congress needs to update the Privacy Act, and we'd be happy to work with this committee or other committees to do so.
Okay, and finally, you state, and I quote GAO's report, agencies may not be consistently taking action to limit the risk to individuals from P11-related data breaches. So in GAO's assessment, what are specific actions agencies can take right now to improve their ability to respond to data breaches, on top of rewriting the Privacy Act?
Sure. One of the actions that they can take is making sure that they have appropriate policies and procedures in place before incidents occur, so they know how to act once an incident will occur. And indeed, our work has shown that the number of incidents involving PII at Federal agencies is climbing, and every agency is affected by that. And that could include having a dedicated team available that has their roles and responsibilities previously identified and trained in those roles and responsibilities in order to act appropriately and timely when incidents occur.
And finally, how can Congress be most useful in ensuring that this is fulfilled, that agencies consistently take all the necessary actions needed?
Well, one, as the Comptroller General mentioned, is to update the Federal laws protecting the privacy of personally identifiable information. Another is holding oversight hearings and holding agencies to account for their incidents that occur and assuring that they appropriately implement proper protections of the personally identifiable information that may be compromised.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you. If no other member has a question for this first panel, we would like to again thank the GAO, specifically you, Mr. Dodaro, and the great work that so many of you and your staff do. I would ask that the clerk change the table, and I'd actually like to mention something as we do this in the essence of time. So again, Mr. Dodaro, thank you. You're excused, and go ahead and make the change. I want to talk about the artwork that you see in here, and I'd like to make a bit of a statement, and again, there will be a little commotion here as we change out the names, and please, if you're on the second panel, please come take a seat. When I became the chairman, we made some alterations to the artwork here. And part of what I was trying to do was I felt it would be best to highlight the people that we serve rather than the past committee chairman. I feel strongly that we should be inspired by those who, by the American people. And that's who we serve. They have done great things over generations of time, and those are the types of people that we should be inspired by. So I'd like to introduce these pieces of art as, again, we get this next panel ready, and I will tell you that they are all real photography and real photos. I'd like to start here with this one. It's of the Ben Franklin Bridge in the Philadelphia skyline. It was taken by a photographer by the name of Charlie Lanch. It's the Ben Franklin Bridge that spans the Delaware River connecting Philadelphia with Camden, New Jersey. Contrasting the urban setting, we have this new photo that was taken actually in my congressional district in Utah. It does look like a painting, but it's an actual photograph that was taken in January. It was taken along the Provo River with the Mount Timpanogos there in the distance, and we live in a very beautiful setting, and I think the contrast between the urban setting and a more rural setting is part of what I wanted to highlight. Going here on this side, this is a photo that was taken, it was first published in March of 1966. Warren Lafler was a photographer for U.S. News and World Report. The images of postal workers loading mail bags into trucks for delivery, and a good number of people for decades, generations, have been doing good work in the Postal Service, and one of our core areas of responsibility. This next photo back over here is of Utah copper miners. We've had people who have been in the mining industry across this nation, whether it's coal or copper or whatnot. This was first published back in 1942. They're using a rock drill machine at the Bingham mine in the Bingham Canyon in Utah. This next photo was taken in Afghanistan. The American flag capturing the morning's first rays of sunlight as it is hoisted from one of the peaks of the Cowtail Paymore Mountain on the outskirts of Kabul, Afghanistan, in honor of Veterans Day. It was shot on November 11th, 2010. Not a professional photographer, but that's one of the most beautiful patriotic shots I've ever seen. And really appreciate the service that Paul Bingham offered this country and the photo that he took that day honoring Veterans Day above the hills there in the mountains outside Kabul. We have had thousands and thousands of Americans serve overseas and in Afghanistan, and we honor them and should be thinking of them regularly. This next photo at the back of the room is actually a civil rights protesters on one of 3 marches from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama. This photo was first published in 1965, they tell me, and is a good reminder that people have gone through a lot of hardship, but also made a lot of progress. And I love the patriotic nature of the carrying of the flags in that photo, and appreciate the Library of Congress providing that to us as well. The next one is of the Golden Spike. Golden Spike actually happened in Utah. It was taken on May 10th, 1869. By joining the Central Pacific and Union Pacific lines at Promontory Point, Utah on May 10th, 1860. The Golden Spike was the ceremonial last spike driven in by Lalonde Stanford to join these rails to form the first transcontinental railroad across the United States, bridging the East and the West together. The next photo is really the only portrait that I would consider here, but interestingly enough, this was first published in 2006. It was from the Library of Congress. The Lincoln Memorial is obviously one of the best sites we have in this country and certainly in the United States, but when he was Congressman Lincoln, he served on the Post Office and Post Roads Committee and the Expenditures in the Department of War Committee, 2 committees that preceded the modern-day Oversight and Government Reform Committee. So interesting to me that Abraham Lincoln, when he served in the House of Representatives, served on what is now known as the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, and an inspiration to a lot of people. Moving over here, we've got 2 more. This photo was taken, comes from the Library of Congress. We're not sure who the photographer was. It was published sometime between 1914 and 1918. It's of women making and crimping fiber powder containers for 3-inch Stokes guns during World War I. It was taken at the W.C. Ritchie and Company facility in Chicago, Illinois. Been, again, a great deal of sacrifice that was going on in this country, and I love the patriotic nature of that one as well. And finally, I want you to look closely at this photo if you have a chance. Excuse me. This is a steel worker on the framework of the Empire State Building high above the city, with the Chrysler Building prominently Displayed in the back. Ironworker. Ironworker. My apologies. The photographer was Louis Hine, and it was first published in 1930 and comes to us from the National Archives. Not exactly OSHA compliant back then. That gentleman is sitting on the precipice of death, working hard to build this country without a safety harness, without the types of things that our workers have now. But a good deal of people have made these kind of dedications and sacrifices, and I'm glad that they captured a photo of it. These are the types of people I think should be inspired in this committee, rather than just the committee chairman of past. And so we made those changes. I hope the committee appreciates that, and I'm honored to have these photos in here, and I thank the members for my indulgence. We'd now like to recognize our second panel of witnesses. Oh, pardon me. I'd like to yield to our ranking member, Mr. Cummings, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, when you told me that you were going to select some photographs, I was, I didn't know what you were going to do. But I must tell you, and all of those who had anything to do with selecting these photographs, that they are absolutely beautiful. I used to say that my father, who only had a second-grade education, but who educated all 7 of his kids, I used to say that I was inspired by his aspirations. And when we look at these pictures, the ones of hardworking Americans in the pursuit of happiness and building our country, I believe that their stories, just looking at them, should inspire all of us to be the very best that we can and to lift up their lives and the people like them, their lives. And then, you look at the other ones that show our environment. I think it should be a reminder that we do have a sacred duty to pass on to our children an environment which is just as good as or better than the one that we inherited. It's said that we do not inherit our environment from our ancestors, but we borrow it from our children. And I say the same thing about our democracy. And so, and last but not least, Mr. Chairman, you really did a hell of a job when you put the Selma one right there, because it just reminds me, every time I look at it, 4 years before that, in Baltimore, it reminded me of us marching, little kids, we were marching, trying to integrate a pool called Riverside Pool. And it was all white pool, we were beaten, but yet and still we marched in the pursuit of happiness. And so I say all that to say that I am hoping that these photos will be an aspiration, will be an inspiration, because of the aspirations of these folks who made America what it is. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate those comments. And now back to the business before us. I thank the 5 gentlemen who have joined us, and I'd like to recognize this panel of witnesses. I'm pleased to recognize the Honorable John Koskinen, who's the Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service, the Honorable Alan F. Estevez, Principal Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics at the United States Department of Defense, Mr. John McWilliams, Senior Advisor to the United States Department of Energy, and then Shantanu Agrawal. Did I pronounce that properly? I know you've testified previously. Yes, he's the Deputy Administrator and Director of the Center of Program Integrity at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and Mr. Robert M. Lightfoot, Jr., Associate Administrator at the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. We thank you for your patience. It's been a while to get to this panel, but we do appreciate you here. Pursuant to committee rules, all witnesses be sworn before they testify. So if you could rise, please, and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Let the record reflect that all witnesses answered in the affirmative. You may be seated. Mr. Koskinen, we will start with you. Your full statement will be introduced into the record, but we would ask that you please limit your testimony to 5 minutes, and we'll go from there. Mr. Koskinen.
Thank you, Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Cummings, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss the Government Accountability Office's high-risk list as it pertains to IRS operations. I'm delighted to note that one of our programs, Business Systems Modernization, was removed from the list in 2013 after being on the list since 1995. Its removal came about because of the advances the IRS has made over many years in addressing weaknesses in information technology and financial management capabilities. Turning now to tax enforcement, the GAO has identified this as a high-risk area because of the size of the tax gap and the difficulty over time in narrowing that gap. The most recent IRS study of the tax gap, released in 2012, found that the tax gap was $385 billion for tax year 2006. The IRS is preparing a new study of the tax gap that covers tax year 2010 and will be based on audits done between 2008 and 2010. We expect this report to be released in the first quarter of 2016. One of the key findings from our ongoing research on the tax gap has been that the compliance rate is very high for income that is subject to information reporting. Income subject to third-party reporting is underreported only about 8% of the time. That number jumps to 56% for income that is not subject to any third-party reporting or withholding. Another thing we've learned from our research is that the biggest portion of the tax gap involves the underreporting of business income by individual taxpayers, which totaled $122 billion in 2006. The evidence is clear that the lack of reliable and comprehensive reporting and withholding on this type of income is the main reason for such a high level of underreporting. A good example of our recent efforts to improve compliance in this area involves the legislative requirement for electronic payment processors, credit card companies, to send us information from business credit card receipts on a new Form 1099-K. The first 1099-Ks were filed in 2012 for transactions in 2011, and I'm pleased to report we're beginning to see positive impacts on compliance from this new program provided by the Congress. Programs such as 1099-K reporting are useful not only because they help the IRS to collect the correct amount of tax, but also because they encourage voluntary compliance. And the importance of voluntary compliance cannot be overstated. A 1% increase in the level of voluntary compliance brings in about $30 billion annually in tax receipts. Even with these and other efforts, I would note that it is not possible to eliminate the tax gap completely. Getting to 100% tax compliance would require a huge increase in audits and significantly greater third-party reporting and withholding than we have now. Realistically, that wouldn't work because the burden on taxpayers and the strain on IRS resources would be far too great. Our budget situation represents a very serious challenge to our ability to keep making progress on this front. In order to absorb required reductions this year, the IRS has taken a number of difficult steps, including the loss through attrition of about 1,800 key enforcement personnel. That translates into fewer audit and collection cases, and we estimate the government will lose at least $2 billion in revenue that otherwise would have been collected. Additionally, the reductions in our funding have forced us to make cuts in taxpayer service. This is also troublesome because if we can't provide the services taxpayers need to fulfill their tax obligations, voluntary compliance will suffer. This concludes my statements, and I would be happy to take your questions.
Thank you. Mr. Estevez.
Thank you, Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Cummings, members of the committee. Appreciate the opportunity to appear before you to discuss a couple of the areas of high risk identified by GAO, specifically supply chain management and weapons acquisition. The Department of Defense has made measurable progress in addressing these areas, as well as in the areas of contract management, as Mr. Dodaro mentioned, and infrastructure. The Department is dedicated towards improving our supply chain and acquisition processes to ensure effective support for our warfighters and value to the American taxpayer. Supply chain management and weapons system acquisition are complex areas that by their nature entail some level of risk. We develop and field the best weapon systems in the world, and our logistics capability is unparalleled, as demonstrated in the last 13 years of war. However, due to the scale and complexity of these functions inside the Department of Defense, even at Six Sigma levels of tolerance, there will be some deficiencies. Therefore, we must continually strive to improve. Today, the DoD supply chain is simultaneously sustaining forces in Afghanistan, supporting the war on ISIL, and completing the mission to control Ebola. At the height of operations in Afghanistan, we provided 1.1 million gallons of fuel and 435,000 meals a day, delivered medical supplies, construction materials, and spare parts to sustain our combat power at record levels of readiness. DoD manages over 5 million items valued at over $90 billion. Our actions to improve inventory performance while maintaining overarching focus of reducing risk to our warfighters have produced substantial results that have been acknowledged by GAO. For example, since 2010, DoD has been implementing our comprehensive inventory management improvement plan. Since 2012, we have reduced government-managed inventory by $14.4 billion, the first reduction in government inventory since the 90s. DoD is implementing a new forecasting methodology, which is producing improved material availability, decreased back orders, and reduced procurements. With that said, there is more work to be done on improving our supply chain performance, and we remain focused on doing so. Second area of high risk that I want to address is weapons system acquisition. It's important to recognize that the weapons system acquisition process has provided the United States with dominant military capabilities. The rise of foreign capability, coupled with our ongoing combat operations, global commitments, and reduced budgets, is jeopardizing our technological superiority. Our weapons system acquisition process must deliver needed combat capability to our warfighters as effectively as possible. Our program for continuous process improvement in this area that we call Better Buying Power, or BBP, is focused on that goal. GAOs and our own main concern in the acquisition area is cost and schedule growth. Under BBP, the Department sets and enforces affordability caps on all major weapon systems. We are tracking performance against established caps to ensure compliance. Affordability caps tie to requirements. BBP drives active engagement between the acquisition and requirements leadership, that would be the operator who uses the weapon system, during weapon system development to ensure that requirements associated with the program address the warfighter needs in a cost-effective, affordable way. We have revised our principal acquisition policy, DoD Instruction 5002, which formally institutionalizes BBP and the improvements resulting from the Weapons System Acquisition Reform Act, including emphasis on systems engineering, cost analysis, and testing. In addition to the actions already mentioned, we are formally measuring our own performance. The first two annual reports on the performance of the defense acquisition system have provided data that the Department is using to increase the performance of the acquisition process, and GAO is also using those reports. In summary, DoD will continue to work with the GAO to address the underlying root causes that have resulted in our high-risk designation. We are and continue to be focused on removing ourselves from this list by correcting our deficiencies for the benefit of our warfighters and the taxpayer. Thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Mr. McWilliams.
Thank you, Chairman Chaffetz and Ranking Member Cummings, members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the Department of Energy's efforts at improving our management of our capital asset projects. This is a topic of great importance to Secretary Moniz and our Deputy Secretary Sherwood Randall. DOE manages some of the largest, most complex, and technically challenging projects in either the public or the private sector due to its diverse mission. The portfolio of large projects undertaken by DOE is unique not only from other projects in the public and private sectors, but also each DOE project is unique from other DOE projects. These projects are truly one of a kind with uncommon challenges, such as handling radioactive conditions or producing extremely bright X-rays for nanoscience. In light of these challenges, DOE has historically struggled with project and contract management, and we have been on the GAO's high-risk list since the list's inception in 1990. We have made some important progress, however, that has been recognized by GAO and others. In 2009, we were removed, the GAO removed the Office of Science from the high-risk list, and in 2013, GAO again narrowed its DOE focus to projects over $750 million in the Department's Office of Environmental Management and the National Nuclear Security Administration. The Department remains very focused on getting off this list entirely. To meet this challenge, the Secretary is instituting changes to improve departmental performance on major projects. And one of the first actions he took when he became Secretary was to create an Undersecretary for Management and Performance to focus specifically on improving project management and providing direct supervision of many of DOE's most challenging projects. In August 2013, the Secretary also established a working group, which he asked me to lead, to conduct an in-depth analysis of project management. This working group was comprised of DOE's senior-most project management experts. We took a very comprehensive look at the challenges that DOE faces, and the group provided opinions as to why projects either fail or succeed in the DOE environment. The working group's findings were issued in a report, which was released in December, and that report you can find on our website at the Department of Energy. The report led to several recent implementation of several efforts to improve project management. First, we've strengthened the Energy Systems Acquisition Advisory Board. We will now review all projects with an estimated cost of $100 million and up. Used to be we only looked at $750 million and up. And the board, which is chaired by the Deputy Secretary and comprised of the senior-most departmental officials, will now meet at least quarterly and will focus on projects that are deemed to be at risk of not meeting their performance baselines. Second, we've established a new committee, the Project Management Risk Committee. This is comprised of the senior project managers who are the same folks that wrote the report that I just referenced. And that is providing risk assessment and advice to the Department's senior leadership, reviewing and analyzing projects before all critical decisions and baseline change proposals, and providing peer reviews and in-house consulting to projects across the Department. Finally, the Secretary has taken a series of actions aimed at improving lines of responsibility and improving our peer review process. The Department is improving accountability by ensuring that for each project, the appropriate Undersecretary must now designate a clear owner who has budgetary and programmatic responsibility. There must also be a clear line of responsibility that extends from the Undersecretary to the project owner to the Federal Project Director. In addition, where it doesn't exist already, each Undersecretary is now establishing a project assessment office. The reforms and processes that we are instituting at DOE with respect to project management are critical steps to meet our solemn responsibility to be responsible stewards of taxpayer dollars. We're encouraged by the work that's been done over the last year, which has been focused on effecting permanent, structural, and cultural change in the way that the Department manages its projects. Thank you. I would be pleased to answer your questions.
Thank you. Members should be advised that there is a vote on the floor. We have 3 votes. The intention is to have the next 2 gentlemen give their opening statements, but we will not get to questions until after votes. So we anticipate that that will happen no sooner than 5:15. Each of you 2 gentlemen have up to 5 minutes, but please be swift, and your full statements will be entered into the record. Doctor.
Great. Thank you. Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Cummings, and members of the committee, thank you for the invitation to discuss the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services operation of these programs. We share this committee's commitment to protecting beneficiaries and taxpayer dollars and to preserving these programs for generations to come. CMS appreciates the work of the GAO. Medicare is a large and complex program serving 54 million beneficiaries and working with over 1.5 million providers. We pay over 1 billion claims per year from these providers. While the GAO continues to classify Medicare as a high-risk program, there is good news to report. The last 2 years saw the slowest growth in real per capita national health care expenditures on record. The 2014 Medicare Trustees Report projects that the trust fund, which finances Medicare's hospital insurance coverage, will remain solvent until 2030, 4 years beyond what was projected just last year. There are also promising improvements in the quality of care furnished to beneficiaries. CMS initiatives have contributed to an estimated 50,000 fewer patient deaths in hospitals and 1.3 million fewer hospital-acquired conditions, saving $12 billion over 3 years. Medical review strategies have resulted in over $5 billion of savings in just last fiscal year. CMS is working to transform Medicare into a high-value payer with payment policies based on quality, not just volume. And we remain focused on preventing waste, abuse, and fraud before it occurs. These issues are not merely about cost. They threaten beneficiary health through unnecessary services, substandard care, dangerous prescribing, and a host of other problems. Since 2011, CMS has been using its fraud prevention system to apply advanced analytics on all Medicare fee-for-service claims. The system also incorporates beneficiary complaints made through 1-800-MEDICARE and works with numerous other inputs to generate and prioritize leads for further review and investigation. CMS then swiftly takes administrative action to stop problematic behaviors through the suspension of payments, medical review of claims, and removal from the program. As we recently reported to Congress, our advanced analytics system has already generated a 5-to-1 return on investment. Another component of our efforts is to strengthen provider enrollment by verifying the legitimacy of new or existing Medicare providers through a risk-based approach. We are screening those that pose the highest risk to the program using routine data checks of licensure and criminal records, scheduled and unscheduled site visits, and fingerprinting. As a result, we have removed over 450,000 Medicare enrollments since 2010, and importantly, denied thousands of enrollment applications, which means that these providers never gain the ability or lose the ability to bill the Medicare program. These unprecedented examples of success have been positively acknowledged by GAO. Additionally, we are engaging with the private sector in new ways to better share information and transform insights into action. The Healthcare Fraud Prevention Partnership is currently made up of 38 private, federal, and state members and continues to gain membership. The partnership has completed studies that led partners to take substantive actions and is developing additional studies based on these results. The President's FY16 budget includes a proposal to allow both public and private partners to support this partnership by providing funds. Beyond the partnership, CMS has made important progress in integrating proven private sector tools in our operations, including advanced predictive analytics, prior authorization, and the use of automated prepayment claims edits. These initiatives net hundreds of millions of dollars in savings every year. Finally, CMS is focused on moving the Medicare program away from the misaligned incentives of fee-for-service reimbursement, like paying the number of tests performed instead of paying for quality and outcomes. CMS is testing different payment models where providers are held accountable for the quality and cost of their care, and providers have a financial incentives to coordinate care for their patients. For the first time, HHS has also set explicit goals for this work. CMS has a goal of tying 30% of traditional fee-for-service Medicare payments to quality through alternative payment models by the end of 2016 and tying 50% by the end of 2018. As a physician myself, I ultimately care most about the health of patients, which I am reminded of daily as I work with CMS colleagues to improve the delivery of healthcare services. Our healthcare system should offer the highest quality and most appropriate care possible to ensure the well-being of individuals and populations. I look forward to answering this committee's questions, and thank you for the time.
Thank you. Mr. Lightfoot, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Cummings, other members of the committee. Appreciate the opportunity to appear today to discuss NASA's efforts to improve acquisition management. NASA develops missions and capabilities to expand the frontiers of knowledge, capability, and opportunities in space and here on Earth. By the very nature of our mission, NASA's activities are inherently high risk. At the same time, we recognize the critical importance of managing our projects as effective stewards of taxpayers' dollars. This means managing our projects to deliver them on cost, on schedule, and identifying risk as quickly as possible so we can implement appropriate corrective action. We've made significant improvements both in managing our projects and preparing our managers. These improvements are already yielding results, particularly with our small and medium class missions. We have seen a significant reduction in the number of projects that exceed their baselines. In fact, several projects have recently launched within their baselines, including Juno, Landsat 8, the Mars Atmosphere and Volatile Evolution, and just 2 weeks ago, the Soil Moisture Active Passive mission, or SMAP. Our larger, more complex projects typically involve the development of significant number of new technologies, which present greater technical risk. But even the James Webb Space Telescope, the next great observatory in space, which was originally confirmed under an old cost policy that we used and had exceeded its original baseline, has benefited from our improved process. The James Webb Space Telescope has remained on track to meet the new cost and schedule baseline we established in accordance with the new policy 3 years ago. NASA cost policies have evolved over time toward a probabilistic joint cost and schedule confidence level analysis. This joint confidence level analysis enables NASA to estimate the probability of completing a project within a certain life cycle cost and schedule based on the individual project's unique technical and programmatic characteristics. A key benefit to the joint confidence level policy is the added rigor it brings to the analysis process, driving an integrated analysis of the cost, schedule, and technical risk. NASA is also taking steps to enhance the agency's earned value management capabilities. Earned value management guidance is provided to the NASA community through the recently released Project Management Handbook, as well as through the EVM Handbook. NASA routinely reviews earned value management data at formal, regularly recurring meetings at the projects, at the center, at the mission, and at the agency level, as well as in ad hoc meetings should issues arise. NASA relies on the knowledge we gain with each new project in order to improve our project management practices, and introduces new tools to assess whether our projects are on track to meet their cost and schedule commitments. I would like to thank the GAO for their hard work and their valuable insights. We appreciate the open dialogue we've had with them over the last few years as we've worked to improve and refine our project management capabilities. As a result, and while I think there's still a lot of work to do, I'm confident that we're on the right track to improving program management at NASA. Thank you for the opportunity to be here, and I look forward to your questions.
I thank you, gentlemen. With the vote on the floor, the committee will stand in recess. When votes conclude, we will continue, and we thank you again all for your patience.